Welcome to Margs and Mayhem, where I tell you a true crime story and we drink. The following content may be disturbing to some. Discretion is advised. If you choose to enjoy one of our themed margaritas, please ensure that you are of legal drinking age and have fun but drink responsibly. Today we're talking about our first family annihilator, a unique kind of case with a unique set of motives. And our drink for today is also a little bit unique. The Blood Orange Margarita. This is for obvious reasons. As always, the recipe for this week's margarita and the ingredients for next week's margarita are in the description box below. By popular request, we're actually going to make today's drink together. I am no bartender, so fair warning, but 2020 really forced me to be creative when it came to drinking, so let's try. Blood Orange Margarita. So you're going to start with a shaker full of ice, or, a cup full of ice is also fine. And something to measure in. The reason I always say parts is because I have no idea how big this thing is. I'm sure someone will tell me in the comments. So I guess you could use the little side or the big side or any shot glass or anything that you would use to measure. So we're going to start with our tequila. My favorite kind of tequila is cheap. It doesn't matter. It's going into a bunch of other things. So have at it. So we're going to do 2 parts tequila. There are people that do this much faster than me, but I'm trying not to make a mess. Okay, so we have 2 parts tequila. The next thing we're going to do 2 parts of is blood orange soda. To be honest, I wanted to get blood orange juice, but it is obviously winter, so I had to go with blood orange soda, and honestly, it is so good. I never want to use anything else. It's carbonated, so it gives this nice little, refreshing feeling. Would be great in the summer. It's delicious. So 2 parts of that. Then we go to the 1 parts. We're going to do 1 part triple sec, which is an orange liqueur. Just gives you even more orangey flavor. 1 part simple syrup. Yes, I know you can make your own simple syrup, and I'm sure it's cheaper and probably tastes better, but I'm a busy lady, so I just buy it. And then, can't be a tequila without the lime, so 1 part lime juice, all in your shaker. Yes, I'm fancy, right out of that cheap bottle. Okay, now we put the lid on, real tight, so you don't spew it everywhere like I've done. And you're gonna shake it up. You're mixing it and cooling it at the same time. Oh, see? Oh my gosh. I am not fancy, so we won't do it fancy. Then I have a glass salt rim. You could do a sugar rim if you want. I don't really like sugar rims, so I don't ever do a sugar rim. You're gonna take your lid off. Ooh, so spicy. You could drink it like this, but I watched some TikToker that told me that you should strain it over fresh ice. So I'm bougie, so that's what we're gonna do. So we're gonna take it. Oh my gosh. Okay, now that we have our tool for survival, let's begin with the worst kind of father. John Emil List was born in 1925 in Michigan to German-born parents Alma and John. He was an only child and had a fairly regular upbringing, except that it was fairly strict, as his parents were devout Lutherans. John really appreciated the strict nature of his upbringing, and it's also worth noting that because of a lack of social skills, John was often considered aloof, and he had a really hard time making friends. This would become a problem throughout his life and would lead to difficulty maintaining jobs. In 1943, when he was 18 years old, John enlisted in the United States Army. He served during World War II as a lab technician. After he was discharged in 1946, he enrolled in the University of Michigan at Ann Arbor to study business administration and later accounting. John had sort of a rigid way of thinking and a precise way of doing things throughout his life. And so this military career and his educational pursuits really did suit him. John married Helen Morris in December of 1951. Helen was a recent widow. In fact, her husband had just died the same year. Helen had a 9-year-old daughter, Brenda, from that marriage, and had also lost an infant several years before. In fact, Helen somewhat cajoled John into marrying her by faking a pregnancy. After they were married, it was revealed that she wasn't actually pregnant. This began a descent into disorder that John List simply could not tolerate. John and Helen moved to Kalamazoo, Michigan, where John took a job as an audit supervisor, and that's where his 3 children were born with her. Patricia, or Patty, John Jr., and Frederick were all born when they lived in Kalamazoo. In 1960, Brenda, Helen's daughter from her previous marriage, married herself and moved out of the house. John moved with the rest of his family to Rochester, New York to take a job at Xerox. In 1965, John's family, as well as his mother, who'd been widowed at this point, moved into a 19-room mansion known as Breeze Knoll in New Jersey, and John took a job as comptroller and vice president of a bank. John lost this job pretty quickly, and after that, he did find a series of other jobs, but he couldn't manage to hold on to a job. His inability to work well with others led him to be unemployed, and he had bills to pay. In fact, he found himself $11,000 behind on mortgage payments for that giant mansion. He had been surviving by skimming money from his mother's bank account, but that just wasn't enough. Instead of telling his family that he had lost the job and suffering that embarrassment, John just pretended to go to work every day. He left at 8 o'clock in the morning and came home in the evening, but instead of going to a job, he just went to the train station and sat there, reading and thinking about all of his failures as a father and as a husband. You see, not only was it John's hidden financial struggles, but the family he created seemed to be falling apart at the seams. His daughter, Patty, who was 16 at the time, had fallen in love with theater and had declared to the family that she wanted to be an actress. His wife of 20 years, Helen, had a really terrible untreated case of tertiary syphilis, which led to a whole host of psychological and physical issues, which she coped with by drinking, and this led to a lot of other issues, and she ended up refusing to go to church. John's family was not in the place that he wanted it to be. And John himself had an undiagnosed case of obsessive-compulsive personality disorder. Now, quick note, this is really not similar to obsessive-compulsive disorder in any way other than by name. The characteristics of the disorder can include a strong desire for order, an unwillingness to yield or give any responsibility to anyone else, and a sense of righteousness about the way things should be done. On November 9th, 1971, in what can be seen as a perverse attempt to restore order to his life, John systematically murdered his wife, his mother, and his 3 children by shooting each of them in the back of the head. Whoops. Should have warned you. It's alcohol time. John first murdered his 46-year-old wife, Helen, by shooting her in the back of the head as she drank her morning coffee. He then went upstairs, kissed his 85-year-old mother, Alma, on the cheek, and shot her in the back of the head. He then went downstairs, tidied things up a bit, and then left to run some errands. These errands included canceling the milkman, canceling the newspaper, going to the bank and closing his account and his mother's account, and taking a note to the children's school saying that they would be away visiting an ill relative for several months. That afternoon, he shot 16-year-old Patty and 13-year-old Friedrich after they got home from school. Then, he made himself some lunch. After that, he drove to the high school and watched John Jr. play in a soccer game. They drove home together, and as they got home and John Jr. entered the kitchen, John shot John Jr. more than 10 times as he struggled to get away. John then wrote a 5-page confession letter to his pastor, and dragged the bodies of his wife and his 3 children into the massive ballroom, laying them on top of sleeping bags. He would write as a PS in that confession letter that he could not move his mother because she was too heavy. He then went to bed, saying later that it was the best night of sleep he'd ever had. When he woke up, he turned the air conditioning as low as it would go, went through the house, picking up every single photograph of him within the house and cutting it out or destroying it. Then he turned the radio on to his favorite religious station, turned the volume all the way up, made sure all the lights were on in the house, and disappeared for the next 18 years. It took nearly a month for anyone to discover the murders. John had done a really good job of wrapping up those loose ends, from the milkman to the school, and the family was somewhat reclusive. The lights, however, gave him away. They started to burst, one by one, throughout the house, and the neighbors finally called the police. Investigators did go to Breeze Knoll, but nothing looked suspicious outside. It would take until December 7th for them to actually enter the house. It turns out Patty's drama coach had heard some really concerning things in theater class. Patty had said that she was worried that her dad might do something to them. After a month of letting the guilt eat away at him, he decided to go over to her house to see if she was there. He was calling at the front door when the neighbors, who were alarmed, called the police again. The police came, and it was the drama coach that convinced the investigators to go inside, and it was then that they discovered the gruesome scene in the ballroom. I'm sorry. I hope this helps. A nationwide manhunt was launched in search of John List. The furthest they got was an abandoned car in the parking lot of JFK Airport, and a further investigation that yielded no plane ticket to anywhere. All leads went cold. In May 1989, America's Most Wanted aired an episode of the nearly 18-year-old case. John Walsh, host of the show, was hesitant to feature it because he believed that it was too old of a case and that it wouldn't get solved. Since photographs of John List were limited due to his foresight in destroying them that many years earlier, the show hired a forensic artist named Frank Bender to create an age-progressed clay bust in order to show what he looked like today, and this was based on a single photograph. A mother and daughter that knew him and were avid watchers of America's Most Wanted called in the tip, and he was arrested less than 2 weeks later. It turns out that John List had traveled around the country and settled in Colorado, where he took the name of a former college classmate, Bob Clark. John lived a fairly quiet life. In 1985, he met a woman named Dolores Miller, and he married her. And in 1988, they moved to Midlothian, Virginia, so that he could take a job there. John List was tried, convicted, and sentenced to the maximum allowed penalty at the time, which was 5 life sentences to be served consecutively. His appeal attorneys asserted that not only was he suffering from obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, but also from post-traumatic stress disorder from his time in World War II in the military. The appeals court didn't buy it, and he spent the remaining of his days in prison. List died from complications of pneumonia while still in prison custody in March of 2008. Nobody wanted to claim his body at first, but eventually he was buried next to his mother in Michigan. Let's talk about family annihilators. Between 1/4 and 1/3 of all family annihilator cases have a financial motive. In fact, it's one of the 3 known motives for family annihilators. These typically happen in families that look respectable on the surface, but underneath are facing financial ruin. The goal in this case is to relieve families from feeling any shame or embarrassment of losing all of their money. The act is called anomic familicide. It is often rooted in deep male shame. The shame that he was certainly feeling seems to have mixed with an obsessive-compulsive personality disorder in the most tragic way possible. His overwhelming and compulsive need to find order in the disorder, as well as to make a plan that everyone would live by, robbed his family of the ability to live any life at all. He stole all of their futures. John Walsh, the host of America's Most Wanted, called Frank Bender's work the most brilliant piece of detective work he had ever seen. In fact, he still keeps the bust in his office. So what do you think? Does John's mental illness explain the murder of his family? How does PTSD fit into all of this? Do you think he had it, as his lawyer stated in his appeal? How on earth did he stay loose for so long? Oh, and his new wife had no idea of any of this. How in the heck did that happen? What can we learn from this? Thanks for hanging out with me. If you have a suggestion for a case, or more importantly, a margarita, feel free to put it in the comments below, or come hang out with us on Instagram. The link is in my bio. Let me know if you liked making the drinks together, and remember, there's always an alternative to murder.